Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We'd like to call to order the May 6, 2015 meeting of the Frederick County Planning Commission. And would you join us in a moment of silence, please? Thank you. We have a moderate change to the agenda, and what we would like to do is to move the master development plan dealing with the Blackburn Commerce Center and deal with it right after we deal with the rezoning issue. So that item will move up, and the rezoning on MBC LC will be last. The other thing is, and this is just technical for us, for the Planning Commission, is that action on the master development plan for Blackburn is an action item, so there is no public comment involved in that. So I think we're ready to get going, if you will agree with those changes.
Madam Chair, I move for adoption of the revised agenda.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Thank you. We do have a set of minutes from April 15th.
Move for adoption of the April 15th minutes.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Thank you. Let's see, we did have some meetings that occurred since our last meeting of our committees. And Sanitation Authority, Mr. Unger?
Yes, ma'am. We met in March, and they reported total customer base for the water that they have is 14,348. Sanitation is 13,860. The current rate, the rainfall for March was 2.96 inches, which was up from the previous month of 1.6. So that looks real good. Actually, it was a little better than average for the year. The water production for the Deal plant was 2.2 million gallon per day. The Anderson plant was 1.8 million gallon per day. We purchased 1.4 million gallon per day from the city, which is up from what we usually do. Daily average is 5.4, which is up considerably from the month before. It was 4.2, but that's got a lot to do with the season, people watering their yards and stuff now. The Deal plant was actually up in elevation about 5 feet at 649. It was 645, which is real good. That's tremendous for this time of year. The Anderson quarry stayed almost exactly the same. And the unaccounted water this month was 14%, which was way up from the previous month of 2%. And they've got some leaks they're trying to find, so hopefully they'll get back on track with that. We did dig a well down at Lake Frederick, production well. They hit pretty good water, 150 to 200 gallon per minute, and they're going to do some more studying with that. That went about 500 feet, so they're going to do some more testing, and hopefully they'll get a better result out of that. And that's about all they have.
Thank you, sir. Transportation Committee, Mr. Oates.
Yes, ma'am. They actually had two meetings. One was on April 27th. The other was on May the 4th. The first meeting, we discussed the Kernstown area plan that the CPPC has been discussing recently, and we'll be going to, I think, public hearing on the 25th this month down at Valley Farm Bureau. And then the other item was a discussion of the House Bill 2 and the rating system for Frederick County. They've got us in a category B. It'd be a lot better for us if we were in a C, and D for rural, C for the MPO area. And that was a discussion that led into this past Monday, and the committee adopted requesting that the county go to the CTB and ask that they change that for us. It would make us more competitive to get state money for roads. And then the other item this past Monday was the 6-year road plan that's going to be coming before us here shortly.
Thank you very much. Mr. Unger, can I get back to you for a development review?
For DRS?
Yes.
Yes, ma'am. Let me get back to it.
Sorry.
We had two items. We talked about the farm distilleries again, and mostly that's for the wine, people that want to make the wine. And I don't remember all the numbers, but basically we tweaked that some, and There is some people in the county that wants to do some wine and have public outings, things like that, and so that's going to be coming before the planning commission soon. And the other thing we talked about was site plan requirements, and we went through that also, and that will also become the planning commission in the near future.
Thank you very much. We'd like to welcome Mark Loring from the City of Winchester Planning Commission. Sir, do you have a report?
I do, thank you, ma'am. Our last meeting on the 21st of April, we had 2 public hearings. The first for some site improvements at 1720 Valley Avenue. That's the old Coca-Cola building, and we recommended approval on those improvements. And then a commercial remodeling at 826 Berryville Avenue. That's the old Long John Silver building, and we also recommended approval on that. Thank you.
And finally, Mr. Hess, who will keep it surprised to the Board of Supervisors decision.
Yes, ma'am. The Board of Supervisors has met once since the last Planning Commission meeting, and that was on, the board met on April 22nd. The only Planning Commission business on the agenda was the Master Development Plan 0115 for Greystone Commerce Center, and there were no comments or questions on that.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. I think that's the end of our committee reports. This is the time on our agenda that if the audience would like to speak to us regarding any subject that's not on our agenda, come forward and share your information. Anyone? All right, seeing none, we will close the citizen comment portion. Our first item is a public hearing item. It is rezoning 02-15, the Blue Ridge Youth Soccer Association, submitted by Painter Lewis PLC to rezone 20.54 acres from the B2 General Business District to the RA Rural Areas District. This property is located east of the city of Winchester on the west side of US 5017 at the southeastern corner of the intersection of Route 5017 and West Parkins Mill Road, Route 644. The property is identified with property identification number 77-A-26 in the Shawnee Magisterial District. Mrs. Perkins.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, members of the Commission. As you stated, this is a request to rezone a little over 20 acres from the B2 district to the RA, which is the Rural Areas District. This is an application for a downzoning from the B2 to the RA. It also does include a conditional use permit, which is the next agenda item. Now, this really only pertains to the actual zoning, so the meat of the application will come at the subsequent item. So this is the location map for the property. The orange depicts the current zoning. You have Route 50 that runs across the frontage in Parkins Mill in this area. So this is the 20 acres subject to this application. The property was rezoned from the RA district to the B2 district with proffers back in 1989. I would note that the original rezoning was for 23 acres. This rezoning is only for 20 acres of that, as after the rezoning, there was a 5-acre piece, which is right there, the split zone piece, that was cut out of the parcel. So I note that that 5-acre piece is no longer part of this, so that will remain split zoned. Now, this downzoning proposed, it is consistent with the goals of the comprehensive plan. The site, as it is now, does not have access to public water and sewer. It is outside of the limits of the sewer water service area. Therefore, the downzoning from the B2 to the RA, it is consistent. So the actual rezoning part of this application is relatively minor. I'd be glad to answer any questions you may have, and Mr. Steve Petler is here on behalf of the application.
Questions, Mrs. Perkins? Don't see any. Mr. Petler?
Thank you, Madam Chairman, members of the Planning Commission. I don't have any presentation to make. I'm just here really to answer any questions that you all may have.
All right. Any questions of Mr. Petler? Sorry, got you up?
I may be back. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And so we have really it's a downzoning for us, and no comments on the part of the applicant. So conversation, thoughts, action? We're going to do a public hearing on this. And that's why I think that a good number of you are here. So we will open the public hearing and ask if anyone who would like to speak concerning the downzoning would like to come forward and do that. Anyone? Anyone at all? Well, seeing none, we will close the public hearing. So we have really little conversation here. Is there any thoughts on the part of the commission in terms of what we should do?
I have no objections.
Madam Chair, I'm not sure what's not to like about this downzoning.
I have no objections.
So, would someone like to make a motion? This is in the Shawnee District.
Move for approval of rezoning 0215.
Second?
Okay, Mr. Moan.
Moan, yes.
Dunlap, yes.
Kenny, yes.
Thomas, yes.
Oates, yes.
Crockett, yes.
Manuel, yes.
Ambrosi, yes.
Marston, yes.
Unger, yes.
And the chair votes yes. This will go to the Board of Supervisors on May the 27th. Okay, our next item is the conditional use permit dealing with this downzoning. It's 01-15 for the Blue Ridge Youth Soccer Association for a commercial outdoor recreational facility. The properties are located east of the city of Winchester on the west side of 5017 and the southeast corner intersection of Route 50 with Parkins Mill Road, Route 644. We've identified the properties are 77-A26A, in addition 77A-26B. And again, in the magisterial districts. Mrs. Perkins.
Again, thank you. As you stated, this is a request for a conditional use permit for the Blue Ridge Youth Soccer Association for the ability for a commercial outdoor recreation facility on 2 parcels of land that total about 62 acres located on West Parkins Mill Road. Now, the conditional use permit, if approved, would enable the construction and operation of an outdoor soccer complex on these properties. Commercial outdoor recreation, athletic, or park facilities are a permitted use in the RA, Rural Areas District, with an approved conditional use permit. Now, these are the 2 parcels involved under the, excuse me, it's not cooperating. Again, 50 Parkins Mill, and then the 2 sites in that area. Now, this is just a general concept plan that the applicant did provide. I did provide you a copy at your seats. It is just a draft, so it is still subject to final engineering, which would be done at the site plan stage. So I would note that the property is surrounded by residential properties that are also zoned rural areas. The proposed use obviously will have traffic, lighting, and noise that do have the potential to impact the residential properties. Now, staff has drafted a number of conditions on the conditional use permit to try and mitigate those impacts. What the conditions will cover are really site access, your lighting, hours of operation, signage, restroom facilities, and buffering. So now I'll go through all the conditions that staff has proposed. First, all review agency comments and requirements shall be complied with at all times. Second, an engineered site plan shall be submitted to and approved by the county. The site plan would show all the improvements on the property, and that would have to be implemented prior to any activity utilizing the facility. 3, permanent bathroom facilities shall be provided on the site. 4, 1 freestanding business sign. 5, it addresses site lighting, that it should conform with the zoning ordinance. Full cutoff luminaries would be required to control light spill, and all lighting would need to be turned off by 10 p.m. 6 is buffering. It states that a single row of evergreen trees would need to be planted. They would be required along any property line that borders a residential property where existing woodlands, minimum 50 feet, are not present. Hours of operation, 8 a.m. to 10 p.m. 8, the property will have only 1 entrance. That entrance will be on West Parkins Mill Road, and there will be no entrances on Route 50 with the exception of possible emergency access. And 9, any expansions or changes of use would require a new conditional use permit. So just another comment, just to address some other concerns. The CUP is only for the commercial outdoor recreation, the soccer fields. So any other uses that would fall outside of that would possibly need, festival permits would have to be approved by the Board of Supervisors as a separate item, such as any type of other festivals, music, things like that. So I just wanted to address that real quick. So with that, I'd be glad to answer questions. And again, Mr. Petler is here on behalf of the application.
Thank you. Questions of Mrs. Perkins? Yes, Mr. Unger.
Candace, is there going to, what kind of buffering or fencing or what is it going to be around the neighbors?
What we have proposed is that a single row of evergreen trees that would be 6 feet in height, 8 feet on center,
Is what?
6 feet in height, 8 feet on center for planting, would be required for properties that are residential that don't have existing woodlands. Direct aerial. Coloring tool's not cooperating with me tonight. So really, like in these areas that don't have existing trees, would obviously need a buffer if they're going to put the facilities next to them, or if they clear out any other areas that are wooded and don't retain 50 feet of woodland, they would need to provide the trees.
Do they have any idea as to, is this going to be a 7-day, 7-night-a-week operation, or do they have any schedule that they propose as how often this is going to be used?
I'd have to defer that to the applicant.
Okay.
Any buildings permitted, food concessions?
At this time, I believe there's only one restroom building that they're proposing.
How many, I'm a little lax on my soccer, how many people are we talking about attending here? If I'm looking at
What if they're
7
all-
fields, assuming that each person brings 1 or 2 children, how many, is the parking adequate here for that?
We would base the parking on the athletic overall, so we would ensure that there's enough parking based on the ordinance for the actual number of fields. But I'm not sure the size of the entire group and if they all get together at the same time.
So we should plan for the maximum then?
Yes, we would plan for the maximum.
Okay.
Would this just be for practice, or would they be holding tournaments here?
I believe they're also going to be holding tournaments. But again, the applicant can,
Do you have a number for the amount of people that will be there at the most?
at this time, I don't know the maximum number of people that could be on the site.
Is it going to be 1,000 or 100 or?
I honestly do not have the total number that are in the group, or what the max number obviously would be during a tournament when you're bringing other teams in.
I think that's it, Mrs. Perkins.
Turn over to Mr.
Petler, I think this is time.
Good evening again, Madam Chairman and members of the Planning Commission. Again, I'm Steve Petler. Again, I don't have a particular presentation, but I would like to address the questions that I did hear that were raised, and please let me know if there are any other questions while I'm up here, and I'll try to answer the best I can. But I have to say, as a preface to that it's difficult to give you a lot of precise answers to what you are asking, because at this stage, all that BRISA is trying to do is acquire the property. There's been no engineering or site plan work done to determine precisely how much parking there would need to be and all that sort of thing. At this point, we're just trying to get a conditional use permit so that we know that if we acquire the property, that it can be used for that in the future. But I have some general information I can give you based on experience that we have. If you have ever had the opportunity, or if you'd like to take the opportunity, pretty much any Saturday from now until the Board of Supervisors hearing on this matter, if you were to go down the Sharando, both sides of the road there's soccer fields, and it'll give you an idea about how many people would be in an area where there are 7 fields. You're talking about maybe a couple hundred people, a few hundred people. You're not talking about 1,000 people, I don't think, at the maximum of any time when there be games going on. The question about whether this is a 7-day-a-week operation, we would hope it would be used as much as possible. So we would hope that it would be used 7 days a week. But reality of the matter is that during the days, during school days, there won't be any use of the fields. Tournaments would be on weekends, most likely. And the evenings, it would probably be used for practices during the week and maybe some games depending on the schedules of the rec league. The question about practice versus tournaments, it would be both. Currently, there aren't a lot of tournaments in the area, and that's one of the reasons why Brysa is seeking to buy its own fields as opposed to continuing to use the fields that it does with Parks and Rec and the school, various school locations that it does, because they are hampered in the ability to do that. That is a way to generate revenue, to keep the costs down for the families that participate in it. Brysa is a rapidly growing organization. I reviewed the numbers of the children involved in the rec league from 2011 through 2014. In that period alone, it's grown 29%. So that's a lot of kids playing soccer, and probably a lot of people know kids that are playing soccer at Brysa. This will also, one of the main driving purposes behind the purchase of their own fields is also to be able to use them without the restrictions that they currently have from the county and the city and the school board for use of the fields. Currently, they pay rent for fields. If it's sloppy at all outside, they won't let us use it. So in order to account for that, the scheduling of the games and the whole season has to have a buffer built into it to plan in advance to not be able to use fields and to be able to reschedule, which creates a strain on the organization, both financially and organizationally, and this would help alleviate that in the future. The anticipated development of something that would look like what you see on the screen there is not going to happen for probably maybe 2 years at the very earliest. There would have to be, as you know, the engineering work would have to be done, and all the soft costs involved in developing it would have to be, the funds for that would have to be raised, and some kind of capital campaign would have to be instituted in order to get the money to develop a full soccer complex like you see like that. It's anticipated that it will be done in some kind of phases, where there will be a few fields at a time being done, depending on the efficiencies that can be achieved and the site work that would need to be done to get it all graded for the fields. Also, the long-term goal would be to have all-weather fields, which would be turf fields as opposed to grass fields. But those are very expensive per field compared to just maintaining grass, which of course has its trade-off because there's maintenance involved in the grass, it's not involved in the turf field. So there's a lot of process still involved for the organization to get it to a stage where it's developed, where a site plan would be presented for approval, and a lot of the detailed questions about parking and how many people would be there would be able to be answered. So really what we're looking for now is just the opportunity to be able to develop this complex with a conditional use permit. I will add that the conditions that staff have drafted are all agreeable to the organization. There's nothing there that gave them any pause or concern. Does anybody have any other questions I'd like to help? Yes, Mr. Unger.
If there's been no planning, and I understand it's just in early stages, but is VDOT going to be involved in this? There's 500 people there. I mean, I would certainly think that would change the atmosphere there a lot.
If you notice the comments to the conditional use permit from VDOT, there's no measurable impact to the road. There's no, that's their term. There's no measurable impact on 644 as a result of the conditional use permit being granted.
Yes.
I think this is a great idea, and I certainly hope to see it come to fruition. It's needed for the kids in the area, and I think it'll be great for the community. But when you come back in with the master plan, some things that would certainly need to be addressed if the conditional use permit is approved would be items, like what really are you going to do with the population? Because I live close to Sharando Park, and I've seen the number of people out there when they have soccer matches. If you ever get to a full build-out of 7 fields, 20 players on a team, 2 teams on each field, you're looking at 280 plus players, coaches, and staff there. If each one of those children or players bring one parent, you're up to close to 600 people. And then, if you're there for a tournament, there's going to be tents a lot of places. There's going to be, the back-end concessionaires that want to come in and sell hot dogs and all that stuff. So the neighbors are going to notice it. And so I think you have to, think through a little bit. You have some screening with the trees and the topography, but I think even though this is I think a very good idea and well needed, sometimes they come with some unexpected consequences. So I applaud this, and I hope this works out. But there's still a lot of thinking, as you said, needs to go into it before the final master plan.
That is conceded, Mr. Thomas. We're well aware of that, and the issues that you raise are issues that have been voiced in different organizational meetings that I've been a part of. I will say that Bryce has been looking for a place to put fields for some time. Everywhere is somebody's backyard, unfortunately, and nobody wants to be the one that gets burdened by something for the benefit of the community, but unfortunately, it's got to go somewhere if it's going to go anywhere. This site is particularly beneficial for a number of reasons. One is the location off Route 50 makes it easily accessible to people from all over the county. It's relatively flat, even though it doesn't look like it so much from here on that topographic drawing. It is flat, so that helps with the development of it. So those concerns are noted, but I think those concerns are going to be wherever Bryce would have the opportunity to locate that. Oh, I wanted to add, the last one I wanted to add, the positive for the site is the price. Mr. Vickers, who bought this in '89 and had it rezoned for thinking he could put an office building there in the future sometime, has never been able to get water and sewer access to it. This is a way for him to, as he said this morning, to reinvest this in the community. Something he's not been able to turn into something else. He's very supportive of the organization, and it's really what ultimately led us to this piece of property.
But you might have to look at a more robust screening, especially where you have some backyards close to the site. Because having been involved with swim meets here in the park, you get 500 swimmers, you end up with 3,000 parents. So, and a lot of tents and a lot of, you get
Right.
300 soccer players, you're going to have a lot of parents and grandparents.
I think we fully anticipate to be prepared to address that in the site plan process.
I'll concur with Roger. But one thing I noticed on here, it's going to be a lot of grading involved. The single row of trees takes care of screening as far as visual, but I think with the amount of grading involved, you should have plenty of excess dirt to where you can put a 6-foot berm, and that would help deaden the sound being carried across to the neighbors.
It would certainly be cheaper to keep the dirt there than take it somewhere else, too. I think, again, once the site plan is developed, I think all those considerations, we will be very mindful of those things, and we do appreciate the attention that you're bringing to this.
A berm, like I said, it's fairly reasonable to do, pretty cheap, because you're going to be moving dirt anyway, and to do that, I think that would have to be a condition. If we left it up to site plan, then it's a do you or don't you, but if we made it a condition, it would definitely be something that had to be built. And that would, like I said, keep some of the noise down for the neighbors.
Madam Chair, Mr. Thomas was talking about the number of people there, and I was doing some calculations over here at the same time he was talking about that, and I agree. I could think he could easily get to 600 to 800 people out here at any one time at full build-out. That's a lot of people. And I'm particularly concerned about some of the screening issues. The 5-acre parcel that sits in the middle, I think those folks are going to get hammered. I think there's the single row of evergreens that's proposed by staff. I don't know that that's adequate. I'd like to see staff maybe consider something a little more than that. Or perhaps the applicant be willing to put more in that.
Well, sir, I don't think I'm competent to propose anything, not knowing what the available choices are. I'm not the engineer. I'm an attorney, and Mr. Lewis couldn't be here this evening. So I apologize for not being able to offer a suggestion. If, I don't know if staff had a response for Mr. Dunlap? No. Again, until it's engineered and we know things like how much dirt we have available that could be used for berming in addition to or in support of the plantings, I really don't think we're in a position to be able to offer anything specific to you. And I'm sorry to say that. I wish we could, but I think it's just too preliminary at this stage.
I have a question, Mr. Petler, and maybe for staff. If this is not served by SWAZA, and it's not served by SWAZA, then how are we going to handle 600 to 800 people, maybe, with a restroom and for the water and sewer? Are we doing wells, drain fields? I mean,
That's all you can do.
There's also some discussion about pump and haul systems that could be in place there, but I think the long-range intention, again, if it's going to depend on how it's phased and what gets built when, is to have septic field.
okay.
Any other questions, comments for Mr. Petler? Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
This is a public hearing on the conditional use permit portion of this item, and would anyone in the audience like to speak to us regarding that? Sir, if you'll come forward, give us your name, magisterial district, and your comments, please.
Hi, my name is Ed Nail. I live in Deerfield Estates, 130 George Drive. And I couldn't hear some of the things the lady was saying about what they plan on doing. Is this just teenagers, or are these going to be adults that are on these soccer fields? And if so, if it's adults, are they going to pay the Blue Ridge Soccer Association a fee? Because I've heard a lot of adult leagues are getting in a lot of trouble in Winchester or Frederick County and have to keep moving fields because of problems that they're having. But the questions I had, the bathrooms were answered. The lights, now I've heard they're going to be lights lit. If these are teenagers or younger than that, 10 o'clock at night is awful late, especially during school years and things like that. I think the lights will put out a reflection for everyone in the neighborhood, so it's going to be harder to, sleep at night, and the noise will mess up our enjoyment for the outside. But I worry about the lights. No matter how you adjust them, there's still going to be an output to the neighbors. In the drawing that they have, I'm probably the closest one to that soccer field number 1 that's all the way over on the right. It looks like it could be 200 to 300 feet from my property line. Now, how many wells are they going to draw? Are they going to drill a well for each field? Because that could come off of our water for our neighborhood. That we have 20 houses in our development. And the runoff, I think someone else answered that question for the runoff. And the buffers, the trees, I agree, the trees is not enough to deaden the sound. The berms may help some, but, and then who's going to inspect the goal? I guess they have inspectors for the goals, because we don't want the same thing happen there that they had up in Stevens City a couple years ago. And then who's going to maintain the fields, cut the grass and everything else? Because I think I've heard some of the people want the Frederick County to take over some of the upkeep of the fields that they have now. And then are they going to route them out to other groups, adult groups and things like that, which they'll stay around after the soccer games or lights are off and party? Are they going to have concerts there that pertain to the soccer fields, or is it going to be play soccer and go home? And how about security? I mean, will they have to have security? Because I know around Winchester Royals and things like that, they have to have security guards walk around when they're having the ball games at Bridgeforth. And I guess the soccer association will be in charge of picking up all the trash. I think that's about all. And oh, I know. This is conditional permit changing or something. His said his final draft drawing aren't done yet. Do they go ahead and change all of this before he comes in with his final approval? That's my question. I don't know how, if you approve this tonight and then he comes in with another plan, does it all have to get changed? I'm a novice at this.
I'm going to respond just quickly to that. What we're talking about are the conditions under which these soccer fields can operate. In other words, 7 days a week, what are the hours?
Yes, ma'am. But he was saying
bathrooms, et
that
cetera.
he's doesn't have the full impact of the drawings yet, and I can't believe that VDOT says the traffic wouldn't be affected on 644. Anybody goes down Parkins Mill knows that that'd be a lot of traffic. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thanks for coming. Anyone else like to comment on this conditional use permit? If you'll come forward, please. And again, name and
Yes,
address.
ma'am. My name is Julie Boulay, and I live on 1148 West Parkins Mill Road, which is the 5 acres that's right smack dab in the middle of all this. And of course, I have concerns. The major one being for my husband and I is that we have it's not very big, but we have a pond on the back of our 5 acres, so it would be on the side that all this is going to be happening. And I know that they'll be doing site plans and all of that and engineering, but we just want to make sure that our pond is not going to be destroyed in the process of this. There's going to be a lot of grading. I mean, even though it's relatively flat, there's going to be a lot of grading, and then with the talk of all these numbers that's been thrown out, it's just very concerning as far as the buffering that'll happen and how it's going to be controlled security-wise. And, are we going to end up with trash and people coming onto our property? The lights, that's a big problem. Is there any possibility that they would be able to cover any of these fields later on? So they're going to be big, huge blow-up things over some of these fields at some point. So all of these things are obviously a huge concern for us, and I don't know if these questions can be answered now, but just that they are a concern.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for coming. Anyone else like to speak with us about this? Conditional, yes, sir. Your name, please?
Tom Yallman. I'm at 861 West Parkins Mill Road. I'm down the road away, so, the lights, the soccer fields, things like that aren't going to affect me so much. But what worries me the most is the traffic. You guys were doing the numbers, and you're coming up about 600 people, 700 people, you're guessing. But remember, that's only for a 1-hour game. If they play 10 hours around the clock, you're looking at 6,000 people coming up and down the road. So I'm kind of thinking myself, living on the road, how am I going to get out onto Route 50, coming down 644? I see a lot of traffic. There's no light at 50 in Parkins Mill. So I think that's what worries me the most. So I just wanted to bring that to everybody's attention.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Anyone else like to speak with us? Yes, sir, if you'll come forward.
Good evening. My name is Jennifer Sheehy, and I'm the owner of Winchester Montessori School, which is located at 1090 West Parkins Mill Road, which is if you look at the site plan, the little sort of cutout right up at the sort of the top, and then it's just a little place, and then you've got the 3 soccer fields, boom, boom, boom. That is our 5 acres, and we have our school, and right up against our property line, and we have our playground, and that's going to be a big concern for me because the children that come to Winchester Montessori School are 16 months of age through 6th grade. And we have just recently had a situation where one of the Frederick County dump trucks found its way onto our property. And we have had other instances where, because of the way that Parkins Mill Road takes a real sharp turn right after our property and right before you get to Wilson's Wild Animal Park, where cars have actually come off of Parkins Mill Road onto our property. And so, again, the idea of it not impacting, and I'm in favor of the soccer fields. I really, truly am. I mean, I'm a school owner, so I mean, I definitely am in favor, but it does concern me just simply because of all of the traffic, and I just think that that's going to be a real, it's going to impact. It definitely is going to impact. And then also another concern would be the buffering, because our property line to the back end of our property, it looks like there are a lot of soccer fields back there. I mean, it looks like they're going to be just really compacted right back there, really close to our property. So those are concerns that I, as the owner of a commercial piece of property right there on Parkins Mill Road, have. So thank you very much.
Anyone else? Anyone else like to speak with us? If not, we will close the public hearing portion. Is there any part of this public hearing that you would like to respond to, Mr. Petler?
Yes, Madam Chairman, thank you. And I'll be very brief. I appreciate everybody's concerns about the traffic, which I hear, I've heard is one of the primary concerns. But there are, as I understand it, objective ways to measure that. And apparently VDOT has run their models. And again, I refer you to the comment that says there is, quote, little measurable impact on Route 644 as a result of this proposal. If any of the neighbors or other concerned citizens have any specific issues they'd like to address with the organization, I will be available after this hearing tonight for a few minutes. And it's anticipated that there's going to be a gathering where they will be invited to have specific questions addressed before this matter would go to the Board of Supervisors if that were to occur. Thank you.
Any of the commissioners want to make some comments? Yes, Mr. Unger?
After listening to everybody talking, when we do conditional use permits, we usually know what's hitting us, what the conditions are, how many people's involved. And I know this one's unique, but in my opinion, until we get more information about the lighting, about the amount of people, even about the amount of fields, we're just kind of giving somebody free reins. I don't think we have enough information to do a conditional use permit at this point. That's how I feel about it.
Yes, Mr. Thomas?
Well, I actually, maybe I'm usually the negative person, but I don't think this is that bad. Because if you look at the sketch they have by Painter Lewis, if you look at the scale, I don't think any soccer field is going to be closer to any residence than over 400 feet. You know, you look down at Sharando and those soccer fields on the north side of Tasker, not Tasker, 277 are actually closer to that group of houses than what these soccer fields will be. My concern is the noise. And as far as the traffic goes, you know, we might be talking about 1,000 people there at a max time. But those people, if they come for a tournament, they'll essentially be there all day because it would be a double elimination tournament. The teams that are there, you might start off with, if you have 14 fields, 21 teams in the morning, and by the time you get to the afternoon, it'd be down to 7 or 8. You wouldn't have, you know, another 20 teams coming every hour or 2 hours. So I think that the traffic really isn't going to be that bad, other than you might, through the week at practice, have a lot of teenage kids driving in and out. But, you know, that's just normal around a school or anything, you know, soccer fields like this. But I do, you know, as far as the noise, I think we would be well suited and protect the neighbors if we did require a 6-foot berm anywhere where there wasn't at least a 50-foot swath of trees between residents and the soccer field. I like the 6-foot berm idea. I know some people don't like berms, but, if you do a 6-foot berm, there's plenty of room around these soccer fields. There's going to be a lot of grading. If you make a 6-foot berm with a top width adequate, you can put your pine trees on top. That'll disperse the noise. It'll protect the neighbors from any trash that would blow. And it really will, I think, ameliorate a lot of the concern with the noise. And the noise is the only problem I really see on this, because, again, with the distance, the lights are going to be going on the field, and as long as my calculations are right, or, the drawing's pretty much to scale, there's not going to be any fields within 400 feet of a residence. Now, the people that have that 5-acre lot there in the middle, they're going to have noise on at least 2 sides. I think the third side over there, a parking lot on one side, and then the other side, looks like a wooded area and a gully that they're probably not going to build on. But again, I think if you put some kind of a berm around that and a little more shielding or buffering, I think it would take care of it. But I'm in favor of this. I'm in favor of the conditions. The only thing I would like to do is add the suggested 6-foot berm around the site to protect the houses.
You suggesting the berm in place of the trees?
No, trees on top of the berm, both berm and
As far as
trees.
the trees, how about, what are your thoughts about requiring Leland cypress or something of that nature? They grow quick, they grow thick, and they absorb noise.
I'm an engineer. I don't do trees. Mine all die, so.
I know how they work.
Madam Chair,
Sir,
even if they get the conditional use permit, do they not have to seek approval for a final plan?
it's part of the,
It's part of the condition.
it's part of the conditions.
Everyone agrees that the soccer fields here are a good idea somewhere. I think there's an opportunity here for private money to supply some recreation here rather than it come from taxpayer money from Parks and Rec or the school system. I heard all the objections and concerns, and they're all very valid. I would just hate to see the benefits get lost in the discussion on the impacts. I think that the recreational and athletic opportunities for our children should weigh heavily in this discussion.
Yes, Mr. Moan.
Madam Chair, I just would reiterate the concerns that I've heard from other people about the impacts to the adjoining residential uses. And I think if there's one thing about this that makes me uncomfortable, it's that really hasn't been nailed down enough with the conditions. And yeah, I'm 100% on board with a berm, a 6-foot berm. Berms are going to do more for noise than vegetation will ever do, and it also will create more of a barrier between the residential lots and, in the recreational areas. I like what Commissioner, my fellow commissioner mentioned about some Leland cypresses potentially, because they do grow faster, they do grow taller, and, I think they'll create more of a screen too. So we're talking about both the noise and the visual. I can appreciate that there's not been a lot of engineering work done yet, at this stage of the game, given the need to raise resources and everything. But I think we do need some of those assurances in the conditions before letting it all go to site plan. And because I think staff and the community really won't have much of a role in that, obviously at that point, beyond what the ordinance would require. So those would be my thoughts.
I support approval of the CUP. It's a park use, it's recreation. I agree with the berm. The alternative is 12 houses at 5 acres each, on 62 acres. And I think any impacts have been mitigated by the staff comments. So I support it fully.
Anyone else want to make a comment on Mr. Oates?
Yeah, I'd like to throw in a few things. One, Leland cypress are also susceptible to a canker that can kill them pretty quick. There's giant arborvitae, so I'd rather just, let's say, evergreen, 6 foot tall at the time of planting. That's good. Berm, obviously. The neighbor with the pond, for that, I think Blue Ridge should consider putting a fence around there, at least for the kids, to keep young toddlers from going down there and getting to the pond. And I could also see the benefits of having a fence along the other neighbors, just to keep kids from wandering off the fields, and, because you're going to have some young kids out here as well as the older ones playing soccer, and that would help with security. I think it would be beneficial to look to see if there's a way to get it exit only out on 50, to have 2 points of access, not an entrance, but an exit only. So people heading back to the east wouldn't have to run on Parkins Mill. You'd be able to spur some of the traffic during big events. And then the other comment that the one neighbor said, I think had a lot of validity, it was, are they going to be running this out? Are there going to be adult players? Are people going to be showing up there to party at night? How are they going to control these fields when the parents go home? Who's going to show up on these fields? So if they fenced it and gated it, that would take care of that. I'd feel more comfortable if the association met with these 4 or 5 neighbors directly and worked out what they want in the way of screening and buffering. And because I'm supportive of the soccer field, I think this is a good spot for it. But I think you need to talk to each neighbor and just work out what buffer they want and make sure they're not impacted. You know, they are going to be impacted, but not as much as what they could be if we leave it like it is.
Anyone else? Any other commissioner? My thought is this, that there have been some really interesting ideas that we may want to add to the conditions for the conditional use permit. And my question to Mr. Petler is, since, well, I'm not quite sure what role the engineer would play in this, but it certainly seems to me that we ought to be able to make some notations if it's the 6-foot berm and any other things that we think should be added to these conditions today, now.
Well, I would suggest, Madam Chairman, that the association would like to have the benefit of its engineer available before addressing any additional conditions that would be put on it. So we would ask perhaps that you table it until Mr. Lewis would be available.
Okay. Yes.
I think tabling is a good idea, but I would strongly suggest that, make sure that Mr. Lewis understands there's some strong concerns.
Well, I've been taking diligent
There's a strong
notes.
desire for this to happen. The fencing, the berm, security of the neighbors is a strong concern of the planning commission members.
Yes, sir. I have noted each commissioner's comments in detail, and we will see what we can do to address them if given the opportunity.
That's right. The applicant has requested that we table. Would someone like to make a motion?
What's the tabling for 45 days?
45 days. 45 days. Or longer if you.
The problem that I can foresee is that we have a contract with the seller that has timetables in it. If we were to go, and maybe I'm asking staff this question, if there's a 45-day tabling before the Planning Commission, when would we be able to then get before the Board of Supervisors, assuming that there was a recommendation for the CUP?
Probably second Wednesday in July, we could get to the board. No, the second week in July is a meeting. So if you table for 45 days, we got successfully through the planning commission, we could go to the board at the second Wednesday in the month.
Thank you.
July 8th.
Thank you, Mr. Lawrence.
Would that meet your time frame?
Well, no, frankly, it doesn't. But I think, I'm certain, actually, that the seller and Mr. Vickers' organization would want to make sure that the neighbors' concerns are well addressed. So I think we will probably be able to work that out. So we would ask for it to be tabled for 45 days.
Thank you. Someone want to make a motion?
Madam Chair, I move that we table this discussion for 45 days on the conditional use permit and allow the applicant to work out some of the conditions with the neighbors.
Second.
Mr. Unger?
Unger, yes.
Marston, yes.
Ambrogi, yes.
Manuel, no.
Crockett, yes.
Oates, yes.
Thomas, yes.
Kenny, yes.
Dunlap, yes.
Moan, yes.
And the chair votes yes. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
All right.
Madam Chairman, I'll need to recuse myself for the next few meeting, or items.
Madam Chairman, I'll have to refuse from the conflict of interest.
Oh, me. Everybody all right? Shall we proceed, sir? All right, this is a public hearing, and it is rezoning 01-15 Blackburn Commerce Center, submitted by Stowe Engineering, PLC, to rezone 128.56 acres as follows: 92.066 acres from RA Rural Areas District to M1 Light Industrial District, with 36.754 acres to remain RA Rural Areas with proffers. The property is located adjacent to Dawson Drive, Apple Valley Road, and Route 37, and is identified by property identification number 63-A-80, I believe that's an I, is it?
Aye.
Yes, in the Back Creek Magisterial District. Mr. Ruddy.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, members of the Planning Commission. This is quite a large rezoning request we have in front of us for the Blackburn Commerce Center. As you noted, it's in the Back Creek Magisterial District off of Apple Valley Road and just west of Shady Elm Road. 92.066 acres of a 128-acre parcel are what is being requested to be rezoned to M1 Light Industrial with some very specific proffers. And of course, that would accommodate industrial uses. The balance of 36.75 acres would remain RA rural areas, and the generalized development plan map will kind of indicate where that is. The property that we just described is highlighted on the screen to your left, and that's with the larger black boundary, if you will. And for points of orientation, running along the western side, Route 37 is the boundary. And when we look on the north and northeast, to the very north is the Fellowship Bible Church. Across Apple Valley Road, there are a number of residential RP lots. And beyond those, immediately to the east, is the Kernstown Battlefield, owned by the Kernstown Battlefield Association. Just to the east and to the southeast, we see two existing industrial parks. One which was termed the Coca-Cola Business Park, was rezoned several years ago and has some proffers, some of which are transferred to this project. And the Dawson Industrial Park, Dawson Drive, providing access to Shady Elm. With this request, the industrial uses that are proposed is consistent with the comprehensive plan, which of course identifies the site as being within the sewer and water service area and with industrial land uses. Because with any rezoning, in particular one like this, we would look at the impact to adjacent properties and of course the transportation impacts, and that's a big component of this particular request. The Old Southern Frederick Land Use Plan is the comprehensive plan component that guides this property, and in particular the western portion, which I've blown up here on this adjacent one. And of course that identifies the site up there in the top corners. I'll slowly get up to it. In that large blue area, again, showing the conformance with the comprehensive plan. What that land use plan also shows are some of the roads in the area, and of course, Apple Valley and Shady Elm being identified as major collector roads to be improved, and of course, Route 11 is an improved arterial road. What you'll also see is Shady Elm as it heads to the south and west as being an improved major collector, ultimately connecting over to Artillery. Artillery is the road that is planned and partially constructed to get traffic back over to Route 11 south of the Route 37. We may refer back to this if we need to in a moment, but this is an aerial photo, a kind of a pictometry photograph of the area which shows the road network and the site. The site is up here to the top of the property. You can see the existing industrial building, and you can see the property. You also might note the large pond that's on the property, and there are a good number of wetlands that run on the property too. So as we move on, when we look at how the applicant has addressed those impacts, they, of course, have provided a proffer statement. That proffer statement doesn't restrict the uses in the M1 district. All uses in the M1 would be permitted. They provided a generalized development plan, which I'll go over shortly. And the proffer also includes access limitations, that they are via 2 entrances. And the first one being the existing entrance on Apple Valley Drive, and the second one being directly onto Dawson Drive, which exists today. Again, that provides access ultimately to Shady Elm Road. The transportation proffer that the applicant has provided, aimed at mitigating transportation impacts, would provide up to $625,000 to be used for transportation improvements in that area. I'll probably come full circle to that here in a moment. But I think it's important to show the generalized development plan for the property, which is very, very basic. But I think more importantly, it recognizes the location of the M1 district and the balance of the RA district, the 36 acres. Again, the industrial acreage is adjacent to the existing industrial land uses. What the applicant has done is pulled the zoning boundary, if you will, off of the properties fronting on Apple Valley Road. So again, 36 acres of RA remains against Apple Valley Road, and no improvements are planned or proposed or disturbance to Apple Valley at this time. The rezoning is for the 96 acres, and the proffers apply to the 96 acres. So what this generalized development plan does also is recognize the pond, the large pond that is in the northern portion of the property. And that portion is also the same portion that's kind of adjacent to the Kernstown Battlefield and the residences on that part of Shady Elm Road. It proposes preservation, of course, of the pond and the existing vegetation around that. Now, as the zoning boundary line is moved off of Apple Valley Road, then there'll be no buffer and screening requirement adjacent to RP. But what the applicant has done is recognize the benefit of the existing vegetation in that area, and there's a proffer been included. And of course, the green line on the GDP shows that green buffer area and maintaining the existing vegetation to grow up in a manner that would provide some form of buffer internal to the property, again, outside of the RA district. The applicant asked to show this, which is the property and also the wetlands that have been delineated on the property, which of course restricts a fair amount of the actual development to the area adjacent to the existing industrial land. So in addition to the things I mentioned with the proffer statement, the applicant has included some site development proffers which address height limitations, landscape screening, and the green space buffer that I just mentioned. The height limitation is important, and I think you may have seen in your agenda that the application went to the Historic Resources Advisory Board, and the applicant has been working with the Kernstown Battlefield Association as evidenced by the agreement that's in the agenda package here tonight. And so there are some commitments that the Battlefield Association and the property owner have made to each other should this property develop. But I point out the proffer limitation on the height limitation of 60 feet. That 60 feet is consistent with the proffered height limitation for the adjacent buildings within the Coca-Cola Business Park, the ones that you see out there today. And so the depth of that rezoning went back approximately 1,000 feet from Apple Valley Road into the site. And that's where you see that being mirrored in the applicant's proffer. It's important to point that out because we have exceptions to the height limitations that allow things to go up to 100 feet. And so that wouldn't apply in that first 1,000 feet. So those are the site development proffers. The applicant has also proffered a fire and rescue dollar contribution to the fire and rescue services in that area. Before I move on, I'll go back to address the transportation impacts. Staff, together with the applicant, tried to evaluate this particular request and come up with some sort of solution to providing a solution or getting us in the direction of providing a solution. It's recognized that the comprehensive plan identifies Shady Elm, Apple Valley as improved major collector roads. It's recognized that Route 11 is an arterial road to be improved. And I also mentioned that as we head south of 37 on Shady Elm, that is ultimately a planned road that serves this area, serves the industrial growth in this area. This particular application doesn't have the ability on their property or control of those properties to perhaps implement any of those improvements at this time. In addition, there are no specific projects underway that they could participate in. So much as we have done in recent requests in trying to provide funding for transportation improvements and use that funding to generate additional funding through state and federal revenue sharing programs, that was an approach that was discussed here, and the applicant headed in that direction. Recently, in the northeast part of the county, the BPG rezoning was a rezoning that took a very similar path, in that there were issues within that area, transportation perspective, but they used the very same calculation based on the square footage of the building to be constructed to come up with a monetary contribution to be used for transportation improvements in that area. And so that is what this applicant has mirrored and has done here. And as you will see in the first proffer, that may generate up to $625,000 to be used for transportation improvements in that area. And that would be received consistent with each building that comes on in based on that square footage. So hopefully that explains the transportation concept and how this will add to hopefully improving some of those situations we see out there. Again, recognizing that the applicant's TIA recognizes there are those transportation impacts in this area. Of course, the applicant, I'm sure, will touch base on that here in a little bit more detail. So ultimately, we're seeking from the Planning Commission a recommendation on this rezoning here this evening. And when we do so, we're hopefully making sure that the impacts associated with the request have been adequately addressed to the satisfaction of the Commission, with particular attention being paid to the approach to the transportation impacts, the amount and contribution of the timing, the amount of the contribution and the timing of that contribution. Madam Chairman, I'd be happy to answer any questions that the Commission may have. And Mr. Tim Stowe is here representing the application this evening.
Any questions of Mr. Ruddy at the moment? Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Mr. Stowe?
Madam Chair, Commission members, good evening. I want to take just a few moments to talk about some of the things that we considered in preparing this rezoning application that you're considering this evening. First, at the recommendation of staff and certainly wholehearted support from the applicant, we wanted to follow the business-friendly approach that this commission and the Board of Supervisors and other citizens in the committee had put forth. From a scheduling standpoint, we wanted to be able to move rapidly with the development of the property and have it ready to move forward for industries that would like to move in and develop on the property. That's why you see not only the rezoning on the agenda for this evening, you also see the MDP, the Master Development Plan, as well. The goal was to be able to move forward following that business-friendly approach. We also looked at other factors, such as the neighbors, and Mr. Ruddy went over some of those proffers that we've put forward that we feel certainly, if they don't eliminate, certainly greatly reduce the impact on the neighbors, particularly those who live along Apple Valley Road. We did this by placing buffers around the pond and along the M1 zoning line, so that land will remain in this natural state. The pond will remain in place. The current plan is for the pond to remain there. And that'll be part of the preservation area as well. We certainly looked at transportation. Mr. Ruddy spoke to that, and we've met numerous times with Mr. Ruddy, Mr. Bishop, because early on in the traffic impact study portion of the project, we realized that there's problems out there. And I can tell you, I've personally lived out that way for the last 12 years, and I know there's certain times when Valley Pike gets clogged up in the evenings. I understand that. I think there's a major project underway right now that's going to help that with what VDOT's doing there at the intersection of Tasker Road and 37. And the ramps on Interstate 81 are going to go a long ways towards improving that. But we didn't want to be, we wanted to participate in a solution But we couldn't find a solution that we could do as a developer, as a rezoning applicant, that was suitable, that would solve the problem. So we went to staff and we began discussing a regional approach, which is when staff suggested to us an example that Mr. Ruddy had mentioned with the BPG rezoning as a good way to go, where we can make a cash contribution. They could grow those dollars through state and federal programs and come up with a much better solution that would solve the problem for more people rather than just our project. We also looked at the entrances. We didn't want to create a large number of entrances out there that were burdensome to the traveling public or to the residents. So we limited the number of entrances to those that exist today. The entrance on Apple Valley Road that Mr. Reddy mentioned, as well as the extension of Dawson Drive into the property. And that was intentional. That combined with the interparcel connections that we've proffered are intended to provide transportation access to the property. And last but not least, for those of you who know my background, this is near and dear to my heart, we met with the Kernstown Battlefield Association. In fact, that was the first meeting we had because that's an important piece of land. What we found is there were troop movements on this property, but the majority of the fighting in both 1st and 2nd Kernstown were east of Apple Valley Road and north of Middle Road. We did enter into an agreement. I believe a copy of that agreement was included with your comments from the agencies. And I'll highlight just a few of the things that we agreed to in writing with the Kernstown Battlefield Association. That there would be minimal reflective glass on any buildings that are built on a property. That the landscaping would concentrate deciduous trees to the south, and this would be more consistent with the character of the property in the 1860s. That we would construct a bus pull-off, and that bus pull-off, you see that on the master development plan. The Kernstown Battlefield Association asked that we construct that so that visitors to the battlefield would be able to see that Confederate perspective of the Pritchard House, of the Kernstown Battlefield, and the properties that they own. That view is not currently available to them. And last but not least, we agreed that they could do relic hunting on the property prior to construction commencing to find any artifacts and to be able to put in their museum for display to the public that they could show and describe what's going on. So with that said, I would just emphasize our goal was to follow the business-friendly approach that was developed by the county. We think that's an important, and we think this was a great project to demonstrate that approach. We think there's benefits that will come to the county from this rezoning in the form of jobs and expanded industrial base of M1 land and certainly tax revenue. And I respectfully request your favorable consideration of the rezoning. And I am available to answer any questions that you may have.
Any questions?
Tim, on your entrances going out to Apple Valley, will that be the primary entrance? Or how much will, I guess, what volume of traffic will go on to Apple Valley Road as opposed to Dawson through that way there? Because that seems to be a little smaller roadway there, but could you explain, do you have any idea how much that would be?
One of the challenges of this property is what Mr. Reddy showed and what's shown on the screen here are the wetlands. And that's really going to dictate, there's about 16 acres of wetlands on the property. And if they were all in one place, that would be easy to deal with, but obviously they're not. And because they're not, it makes development of the property, it pushes the development of the property towards the south end. That's the area that's more usable. And with that, we feel like there's probably going to be a building that'll use that existing entrance out onto Apple Valley Road, and other building, maybe a second or third building that'll use Dawson Drive. In the end, we anticipate about a 50-50 split on the traffic, but it may be a little heavier on Dawson Drive than it is on Apple Valley.
Okay, thank you.
In your proffers and TIA, glancing through them, and maybe I misunderstood it, but it looks like the $625,000 is prorated based on square footage being constructed, and it wouldn't be paid until the occupancy permit is issued. Is that correct?
Yes, sir, that is correct.
And this is a chicken and an egg type thing, because when you issue the occupancy permit, I would assume the owner then is going to want to start using it as soon as possible, but the road improvements are going to have to occur after that. Would you consider changing that proffer to providing the transportation money when the construction permit was issued instead of the occupancy permit? That would then give the county and the state some time to actually take the money and use it for matching funds to get construction of the road, of transportation improvements done maybe closer to the time when the occupancy of the facility occurs.
Roger, I understand your question. I'm going to defer to staff because it was my understanding there was a legal requirement or maybe even a ruling that we were supposed to do this at the CO stage. So do I have that correct?
That does not apply to commercial. That only applies to residential.
So the proffer could be changed that it would be provided to the county when construction started for that facility or that square footage when a building permit was issued and not at an occupancy permit time. There's no legal restriction on that.
That's correct. It was, of course, initially tied to the residential development side of things for the occupancy permit. So I think we have flexibility.
That would give more time to actually use the money when it was needed. Because when I look at the TIAs at the build-out condition, and you're talking a 2025 build-out, and I assume that's when you'd have the full 100% build-out for your facility, all of the traffic TIAs without improvements go from a B, C, D to an F condition. So without the transportation improvements, it's not going to be very drivable around that area. So
Understand. I would say we're not going to build everything at one time, obviously, as you understand. You said that. But I would also say when these buildings, when these companies come in and the types of company that we're working with to attract to the property, they're going to want to move fast. They're going to move very fast. So it's often, the definition of that is often unclear. So
that's to my point that it would better have the money when the building permit was issued than at the occupancy permit because they're moving fast and they want to occupy it and get business started. So, second question, do you have in your TIA, I didn't see it, but do you have is most of the traffic truck traffic or is it vehicle traffic?
Most of it is going to be employee types of traffic. There will be trucks. One company we spoke with, for example, is about a quarter of their traffic is trucks, and the rest of it would be employees who would work there.
So it's probably nothing like a 50-50 or a 75-25 truck traffic versus employee traffic.
No, and in fact, when we did the traffic counts, we were a little surprised at the adjacent warehouse because during the peak hours, there were 4 vehicles in the morning peak hour, and there were no vehicles in the evening peak hour. So it appears the industries have shifted their either the shift changes or their arrival departure times of trucks to be able to miss some of the problems that we know exist out there.
Truck drivers don't like sitting in traffic, not making any money.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Yes, Mr. Unger.
Tim, on the $625,000 that was proffered for transportation, I know you mirrored another piece of property someplace to come up with that figure, but how do we as planning commission members know what's the right number? Could it be 300,000 or could it be 1.2 million? I don't know what's the right number to say this is a good deal or we got treated fairly.
Greg, I think that's a question that we wrestled with for weeks. And eventually we got back around to this rezoning case that Mr. Ruddy had mentioned that had been approved by the Planning Commission and the Board of Supervisors. And that's the BPG big medical warehouse up in the Clearbrook area. And what we realized is it's very similar in nature in that you've got traffic congestion problems on the north end up there at exit 317 that are tremendous in the afternoon. But BPG was probably 5 miles away from that particular problem area, and there was no way that they could go down there and fix it because they didn't own property where they could dedicate right away or go in and do construction. So that was held up as a model, actually by Mr. Bishop, suggested that. And the dollar amount per square foot was consistent with what was approved in that rezoning, and that's where that came from, and that's how that came about.
And maybe you do it with a square foot, but is it the same type of business that's going to put the more or less traffic on the road, if you know what I'm saying?
Yes, sir, and that's why it was held up as an example, because it's the same type of use and the same types of traffic were expected to occur on this property as did there.
I'm very much in favor of what you want to do, very much. Traffic is my biggest concern, and I would like to hear from Mr. Bishop about that, to see how he feels about it.
Yes, sir.
Just what I said, I mean, do you feel that that number is fair with the amount of land we're doing and what's going on here?
You know, it's the $600,000 question, isn't it?
625, yeah.
But the fact is, when you've got a use like this that's feeding into a problem that's existing, that frankly you could bring another HP Hood out there and they couldn't afford to fix what's broken out there. You have a very significant issue in terms of shortage of capacity on Route 11, and this intersection is part of it, but for our purposes it's the network, which is part of why we've been trying to get Renaissance Drive developed as well. So the BPG was the same use, warehousing type use, the same situation in terms of the big one that they were getting hit with, well, frankly, a couple in terms of Rest Church Road intersection, but also Brucetown Hopewell Road intersection, both of which they weren't in a position to be able to do much of anything about because they didn't really have access to that right away, what they would need to do, let alone be able to afford the full solution and still develop their property. So it, to me anyway, was a very good nexus of comparison in terms of a proffer that was cash-based, based on square footage. Square footage is how you calculate the trips on a TIA for something like this. So that was very similar. And it was the most recent, very similar rezoning that was acceptable to the Planning Commission and Board. So that was what led me to recommend that they look at that as an example as they tried to craft their own proffers to offset their transportation impacts as best they can. In a situation like this where you already have a deficiency of traffic in the network, it's very difficult, next to impossible, to say, all right, new development that's coming in, this is the right number for you, which was why our second best guess was to go back to what was most recently acceptable to the Planning Commission and Board.
John?
Yes, sir.
I know we use the BPG and the medical group up there, but that's not a density up there of residential homes that we're having here. Nor is it that road system quite the same up there. That's Route 1181. There's more exits closer by to get truck traffic, vehicular traffic before it gets down to the exit 317. In today's dollars, what does $625,000 get us? If it was to go out to improve something, does it get a wider road? Does it get more entrances?
A number of things. Typically still, if you're going to signalize an intersection, for instance, you're looking at about $250,000. Frankly, if you're talking about doing that at Apple Valley Road, you're looking at more because they've got a power line running right down next to it. Another thing we found attractive about the cash piece was that we can team that up with revenue sharing dollars and get a little more.
Could you get matching or
buck? Yeah, that's
matching dollars, you think?
That's exactly what I'm talking about, yes. So that was what was attractive to me anyway, in terms of a cash proffer. And frankly, part of it was, we've continued to have sputtering, admittedly. Conversations with the Venture One folks as far as trying to get Renaissance completed through. And I saw that if there were shortfalls in that area, once that project got moving, that this would make sense to feed those dollars into that as opposed to pumping them into the intersection, knowing that we can't do both.
All right.
Yes,
Yes,
Mr.
sir.
Thomas.
Revenue sharing dollars, does the county have to have the dollars in hand to get revenue sharing dollars, or can you go on a promise?
Now, typically, we apply when we think we've got something going on before it's at, Russell 150 is a great example. We've got a lot of revenue sharing dollars built up on that project, but we still don't really have a partner. So does that answer your question?
And there's one paragraph under the B. It says an example application describes an anticipated project to be submitted upon rezoning may generate $153,000. Doing the math, that's about a 112,000 square foot building, something like that. Is that what we're looking at? Unless we go with Mr. Thomas's recommendation of putting all the dollars in up front.
I believe you're correct, and yes, unless they did it up front, we'd be seeing something else.
Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Unger.
John, if, I think it's Renaissance, if that road was complete, how much do you think it's going to help the problem right there? Or I'm sure you have an idea right there where you get on the bridges and stuff.
We expect it to help quite a bit. The entire area obviously has issues. We should see some improvement, as Mr. Stowe mentioned, with the expansion of the ramps at exit 310. I'm sure not as much as we would like, dominoing down to 11. However, what that gives us the ability to do is feed a lot of that Parks traffic into the south side of the interchange instead of everything having to come in from the north as it currently does. You're a lot more congested on the north side of the interchange on Route 11 than you are on the south right now. So that offers a very nice workaround once we get that completed between Shady Elm and Route 11, so that trucks and employees or whomever is trying to come to and from out of those places to access the interchange to get around and come up from the south instead of feeding in from the north along with everybody else coming out of the city and off of Shawnee Drive and every place else.
And they get that big parking lot fixed they're working on right now. That's basically what it is. Is that going to relieve a lot of the pressure that's right there now?
Clarify that for me again. Parking
All
lot.
that improvement they're doing on the exit right there and.
Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah, it's going to help us quite a bit. I mean, right now, particularly in the evening peak hour, things just back up through all three of those signals. Your biggest problem is you can't stack properly, and then that gives you a domino effect all the way back onto 11, frankly. Bumping Tasker Road further to the east, spacing those ramps wider is going to allow for greater queues and subsequently easier clearances through the signal cycle as opposed to that domino effect of it. There's a term called platooning when you're talking about signalization, and once you've backed up the same platoon through all your signals, everything just breaks down. But with the greater spacing, you're allowed to reestablish that platooning of traffic to move through the system.
Anyone else for Mr. Bishop? Thank you, sir. Thank you. This,
Questions?
One, Tim, did I hear something about fire and rescue? Was there dollars going towards fire and rescue, or is that?
That is correct, yes. If you look at the last page of the proffers, you see where there's a dollar amount being proffered to fire and rescue, in the amount of $10,000.
Okay, I'm sorry. Thank you.
May I add a footnote to Mr.
Mr. Thomas?
Thomas's earlier question?
Since you know, we can't require you to change a proffer, they're obviously your proffers. Do you think the developer, I'm assuming you're speaking for the developer tonight, would he consider changing the proffer or the timing of the transportation money to when the building permit was issued, vice the occupancy permit issued?
Roger, what we're doing, and the reason I mentioned the timing of these economic development projects earlier is because it's just going to be a matter of months between the time building permits issued and the COs issued, and in most cases, certainly less than a year. We have a local industry who's come to us and has an interest in building on this property if we can get them under roof this year. That's why we followed the business-friendly approach here. And at this point, if we were to delay the process, we're probably not going to meet that requirement.
I'm not sure that would delay the process, but it would give John more time to go get matching funds to try to do some improvements. I mean, that's all I'm looking for, is trying to get a little more time. I mean, I'm not asking for more money or anything like that, or suggesting more money. I'm just changing the timing so that the county staff can get more time to go search for money.
Yes, I understand. My point is, if we can't get the rezoning cleared, then we're going to not be able to meet the deadline of the industry that wants to expand. I would also tell you,
Timing of the payment may impact votes positive or negative too.
correct. And I would also share with you, having gone through the revenue sharing application process with Mr. Bishop on other projects, that is a process where I can almost promise you the money will catch up to the project when it's needed, and Mr. Bishop can speak to that if he would like to.
Great. Okay.
So the word is yes, we can do that. We can, with the building permit, yes.
Thank you.
A voice just whispered in my ear. I don't think it was an angel. Any other questions?
Any other questions for Mr. Stowe? Okay, thank you, sir. This is a public hearing. Is there anyone in the audience who would like to speak to this rezoning? Anyone at all? And do as the others come up, give your name, your magisterial district, and offer your comments, please.
I'm Bruce Dawson, and my wife and I own the Dawson Industrial Park. And first of all, I'm in favor of them developing this property, but I'm very concerned about using tractor trailers on Dawson Drive. It's basically, a Dawson Industrial Park is basically an office park, and there's probably between 200 and 300 people working there, mostly women, and they go from building to building. And I don't think they would like all of the noise of tractor trailers. I don't have any problem with automobiles going through Dawson Drive to that park, but we would have a problem having tractor trailers using that as an entrance. It is a private road. We own the road, and I would want to do whatever we could to limit the traffic to just automobile traffic.
Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who'd like to see? I saw a couple of hands. If you'll come forward, please.
My name is Paul Peters. My wife and I moved here about 8 years ago. We live on Jordan Drive, so you can't see it from there. Our elevation looks out over from the south all the way to the north. So anything that's built below affects us in the view. When we moved to Winchester, there was an article talking about the warehouse that was put in, how that would make such a great impact financially for the county, and it would allow building. The lights from that affect us every day, every night, because they are so bright and we're so high up. Here's the bottom line. All of you have beautiful homes with beautiful views. We purchased our home for our view. There are lots of places in the county and in the city that can have houses or businesses built. We lived in Loudoun County, and I was part of some of the studies there, and they showed us a map for a 10-year plan of Route 7 from Sterling to Leesburg. building by building. I mean, they were planning the whole thing. Now they have all these buildings, they don't have anyone to occupy them. The same thing with the warehouse. The warehouse was sitting vacant for years. I can't see, the other part is we're digging up American heritage here. I mean, I agree that Kernstown Battlefield can certainly have the artifacts, but we're digging up American heritage. And when there may be a more suitable site that doesn't have implications like that. The other thing is business friendly. I keep hearing that, and I also hear so much about the dollar contributions. And from a perspective of a homeowner, the contributions sound more like a payoff to get the building permit or get the site approved for them. Where what's the impact on the homeowners? We live on we live in what used to be all apple orchards. Beautiful area, but it's going to be impacted by all the traffic. Middle Road's a 2-lane road, Apple Valley's a 2-lane road, and it's going to take away the residential appeal. What is it going to do to our property value? I don't know. But I tell you, when we bought the land, we bought the house, it said most beautiful view in Winchester because we could look out over the valley. And I just think that there are other sites perhaps more suitable than a battlefield. We live on, it's called Sandy Ridge, by the way. And the property next to us is the Deering property. And that's now going into having houses built. And that again, there are artifacts from the war there, Civil War. So anyway, that's just an opinion from a homeowner.
Yes.
So, thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Peters. Excuse me. Is there anyone else who would like to address this rezoning?
Thank you, Council. My name is Joshua Cohen. I live off of Jones Road. I'm opposed to this completely, and the reason I'm opposed to this is this has negative impacts all over it. You're taking a property of 128 acres and you're asking to rezone 92 acres to allow for an M1 condition based off of master plan from 2030, 15 years from now. You have a historical property that has a M1 zoning base on it prior to this property, granted. However, you then leave and you get into a residential community. You have 2 impact roads of Middle Road and Apple Valley, which $625,000 is not going to mitigate the impact. I have a Class A builder's license and I've been developing for almost 15 years. I can tell you that $250,000 for an intersection light is pretty accurate. However, you've got to put lights in here if this is going to move forward, because the impact of not only your commercial vehicles, but your impact of the employees that may or may not be going through these areas is going to have a detrimental impact that's not going to be offset or mitigated by what's going on at 310. That is so far removed that it's not going to have a positive impact for the daily congestion that this project would bring. Above and beyond that, you're claiming that 16 acres are in wetlands. Why is 92 acres being requested to be mitigated back or removed back over to an M1 zoning when 16 acres internal to that has no value, and that's already been demonstrated by the applicant? Moving forward with that, you've got a height restriction set of 60 feet, but you've got a variance in there to take it up to 100 feet. If you've got a height restriction of 60 feet with variances of over 100 feet, not only with the gentleman that was just up here, you lose all your views. This is a rural agricultural area. Granted, M1 district is on Apple Valley. Moving out of that, you've got nothing but agricultural and residence. And you take away the viability and the value set for the residents of Frederick County by allowing commerce to come in that hasn't actually been described outside of the FBI might be interested through the GSA, which this has been ongoing for almost 12 years. You've got potential commercial properties coming in that want to develop on this site, but we don't know who they are and we don't know what the impact's going to be on this site. So you're trying to convince the community at large that this property that's been on the market for over 5 years that it's got more of a value as a commercial aspect than a residential aspect, that's asinine. This is a residential aspect, this is a residential area, and it needs to maintain itself as a residential area. The value here, especially having the water and sewer for the county, is higher by developing this into a residential PUD than it would be developing this into a light commercial or a light commercial industrial use. You'll have more tax revenue by developing this out with a 35-foot height restriction for residential homes, and it can be mitigated with proffers and development in conjunction with the battlefields and the residents versus taking 128 acres and destroying it into a M1 district and then degrading everybody else's opportunity to continue to capitalize on their real estate investment, as others have already stated. I think this is one of the worst things that could happen over on that side of town, based specifically off of the fact that this is a residential area, not meant to be a M1 district, even though the 2030 master plan stipulates that it could potentially be. That's 15 years from now, and this project, prior to what you're talking about, it took years to get those warehouses leased up and occupied. So we could sit here and have a rezoning, and they could build one structure, and then we might not see another structure for 20 years. And that just degrades everything that the county is all about in regards to the values and the historical appeal of what Frederick County is. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else like to address us? Anyone? We will then close the public hearing. Mr. Stowe, is there anything that you would like to respond to from the comments that have been made?
Yes. Just briefly, Mr. Dawson had concerns about tractor trailers on Dawson Drive. This, as I understand it, the right-of-way has been dedicated to the county. Certainly, VDOT would be involved in anything we do. And if there needs to be improvements there, we would certainly need to make those improvements. And I'm sure VDOT would be happy to tell us what needs to be done. With respect to the view shed, again, I mentioned earlier, we've done many things to try to protect the view shed from the neighbors. We realize we can't protect it 100%, but we've gone to pretty great lengths to try to protect those view sheds, and that's stipulated in the proffers for us as well. The gentleman who just spoke, I missed his last name, Joshua from Jones Road. I hadn't really considered residential for this property since the comp plan showed it as industrial. That seems like the highest and best use for the property based on work that's been done by the local government, by the Planning Commission, by the Board of Supervisors in adopting the comprehensive plan. So we haven't considered any uses outside of what's been adopted there. Any more questions for me? Anything I can answer? Thank you very much.
Anything that you need, Mike? Okay, all righty. Well, here we are.
Yes, I certainly there's always concerns about a development. The neighbors are, the closest folks to it are always more impacted by the development than those of us that live a distance from it. My biggest concern was the transportation part of it. I think with the proffer change, putting the transportation money up front when the building permit is issued and not when the occupancy permit is issued, I think with that change to the proffers, that pretty much is probably one of the best we can get. Certainly this development didn't cause the traffic problem there. We just don't want them to make it any worse and be part of the solution. And I think with getting the money up front at the building permit time allows the county staff to let them or help them be part of the solution and not part of the problem. So with that change, I'd certainly vote positive for this, recognizing that, yes, some of the neighbors might not be happy, but, it's always, just as we heard before in the previous rezoning, it's not always possible to make neighbors happy because nobody wants anything in their backyard, and I understand that.
Any other comments? Mr. Unger, you took a deep breath.
If nobody else has anything to say about that, I do know that we have a traffic problem down there. I do think it's a good location, and looks like we do have a customer that wants to do something there. So with all that said, and being inside of 37, I would recommend approval of rezoning 01-15 Blackburn Commercial Center.
That includes the proffer change.
Offers with that to get the money early at building permit.
I'll second that.
All right. Everybody okay? Any other comments?
Can I get a clarification? That did include the proffer change?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Mr. Moan?
Moan, yes.
Dunlap, yes.
Kenny, yes.
Thomas, yes.
Crockett, yes.
Manuel, yes.
Ambrosi, yes.
Unger, yes.
And the chair votes yes. This will go to the Board of Supervisors on May the 13th. All righty. We now are going to skip over what was our next item to get to the Master Development Plan 0215 for the Blackbird Commerce Center submitted by Steve Stowe Engineering PLC to develop 139.96 acres of land zoned RA rural areas in M1 light industrial with industrial uses. The subject properties are located adjacent to Dawson Drive, Apple Valley Road, and are identified by property identification numbers 63-A-80I and 63-A-38C in the Back Creek Magisterial District. Mrs. Perkins.
Again, thank you. As you stated, this is a proposal to develop a little over 139 acres, currently zoned with the RA designation that you previously discussed, as well as an additional area that is currently zoned M1. Parcel 80I is the Blackburn tract that you previously discussed, and then there's parcel 58C, which was part of a 1998 rezoning for the Coca-Cola Business Center. This is the location map, the screen to your left. And again, you have the Blackburn piece here, and then the existing M1 from the Coca-Cola Center. And this is the master plan included in your agenda. It is relatively similar to the GDP from the rezoning. It does show the buffer along Apple Valley, the existing pond, the green space areas, as well as the access and the pull-off for the battlefield. With this application, they are requesting to utilize private roads within the center. Therefore, a waiver of Chapter 144, 24C of the subdivision ordinance is required to allow them to subdivide properties on private roads. So with that, we do need a recommendation on the waiver from the Planning Commission to forward to the Board of Supervisors. So with that, I would state that the master plan is in accordance with the pending proffers for the Blackburn tract, as well as the existing proffers from 1998. The master plan itself is an informational item, but the waiver, as I stated, does need a recommendation. Glad to answer any questions.
Questions of Mrs. Perkins? Any comments on the master plan? All right, we do have a request to do a waiver for privately, utilize private roads within the Blackbird Commerce Center.
Oh, I'm good.
Would someone like to make a motion or not?
Madam Chair, I'll move that we approve the use of private roads within the Commerce Center. That means the developer's is 100% responsible for all maintenance of those roads.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any comments? Any further comments? Okay, Mr. Unger?
Unger, yes.
Ambrosi, yes.
Manuel, yes.
Crockett, yes.
Thomas, yes.
Kenny, yes.
Dunlap, yes.
Moan, yes.
And the chair votes yes. This also will go on May the 13th to the board. All right, we are going to move back to a public hearing item. It's rezoning 03-15 MBC LC submitted by Gray Wolf Inc. to rezone 2.96 acres as follows: 0.60 acres from MH1 Mobile Home Community District to B2 General Business District with proffers, and 2.36 acres from B3 Industrial Transition District to B2 General Business District with proffers. The properties are located on the south side of Route 7, approximately 3/4 of a mile east of Winchester at Eckerd Circle, and are identified by property identification numbers 55-A-34 and 55-A-34A in the Redbud Magisterial District. Mr. Ruddy.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, members of the Commission again. We're moving, of course, to the east side of town off of Berryville Avenue, Route 7. And highlighted on the screen to your left are the properties for which the rezoning is being requested. The two properties, the first one being the one that's highlighted in red, that's the B3 zone property, 2.36, I believe, acres. That was a zone B3 back in the 90s, and it was zone B3 with only one use permitted, a very restrictive proffer for mobile home sales. The mobile home sales business was there for a number of years, but has left the property and moved elsewhere in the county. So it's been vacant for quite some time. The 0.6 acres of MH1 is the one that's to the left of the screen, and that's generally between the mobile home park, this site, and the Carlisle and Anderson project next door. So that's the location of the properties. Directly across the street from this is the Hilltop Assisted Living Facility. What I provided here was just an overview from the new pictometry of the site, showing its current conditions. And you can also see in the right-hand part of the screen here its proximity to the existing intersection of Route 7 and Millbrook High School, with Blossom Drive to the Shenandoah Hills project to the south. So that just shows some proximity of the site to the nearest adjacent intersection. To the west is the Sheets intersection with Regency Lakes, and that, of course, is the nearest intersection to the west of this site. The commercial uses are generally consistent with the comprehensive plan. I mentioned B3 exists, B2 is proposed, and commercial land uses are recognized adjacent to Route 7 in this area. So as with any rezoning, much like the previous one, we need to evaluate those impacts associated with the request. And with this one, again, transportation is one that we would think of being the primary impact. This is not a proffered generalized development plan, but the applicant provided this with their information to show what the initial anticipated use would be, and that's generally a parking area for a car dealership of some sort. Again, that's not a proffered use, but it's one that would be allowed in the B2 district. And it's one that the applicant, again, recognizes that might be the initial use on there and has a very low trip count. I mention that because the proffer statement allows all uses in the B2 district. And of course, those uses have a variety of trip generations. And there is no generalized development plan provided. So it's important to recognize that vehicle trips per day, have been used to trigger those development conditions. And it's a very simple project, perhaps, but the trips trigger the entrance improvements or the staging of those entrances, which are highlighted on that previous image we shared with you. So there are 3 entrances, 2 that exist on Route 7 today, and 1 that would be developed, improved, if you will, on Eckerd Circle. And so the trip triggers that they used, I think it was 500 vehicles per day, 1,500, and with a cap of just under 3,000 at 2,977 for any use on the property, provides some limit to the trip generation and traffic impacts. And again, those entrances that are part of the project are proposed to be closed in certain stages, with the one that is located to the west farthest away from the existing intersection, and therefore reducing the weave associated with anybody wanting to go west on Route 7 would be the ultimate one for the higher trip counts. Addressing the transportation impacts, of course, Route 7 is pretty significantly improved in that area. A fair amount of right-of-way has been dedicated, and frontage improvements and trail will be provided. So again, looking at what intersection improvements, what improvements could be evaluated in that area, there's a very clear need for some pedestrian accommodations improvements. And so that was an opportunity there to address a long-standing need at the intersection with all the children walking over to the high school, crossing that area, especially should the use of this property change to something that might encourage more traffic. So the applicant has proffered a $10,000 contribution once the site hits 500 vehicle trips per day, increasing to $50,000 once it hits 1,500 vehicle trips per day, should that occur, of course, based on the site plan. So that's staging, again, tied to trips, is their attempt to address the transportation impacts consistent with some issues that have been identified in that area. This application, again, provides a monetary contribution for fire and rescue based on, again, square footage calculation. So, much like the previous one, we're seeking the Planning Commission's recommendation on this rezoning request, and the transportation impacts have been addressed in the manner that deals with pedestrian improvements and in the amount of $10,000, $50,000. So that's really the evaluation, again, of the commission, is the amount and timing of that contribution relevant relative to the impacts associated with this request from B3 to B2. Be happy to answer any questions the commission has, and I believe Mr. Timstow is representing the application again here this evening.
Mr. Unger's got a question.
Mike, what does a site plan have to do with the amount of trips? I mean, how are you going to know when there's 500 or 1,500 vehicles running in and out there?
Good question. We have Mr. Bishop here too, but I won't get him up because I can answer that one hopefully. The site plan, once it's approved and reviewed by VDOT, the trip ITE manual basically mandates a certain number of trips per use, or for whatever that use may be, whatever may be approved on the site plan. So with the approval of the site plan, we can be pretty certain that X square feet of office space would generate X number of trips. So with the first site plan in there, if they're less than 500 trips per day, they really don't have to do much other than the improvements that we would need anyway. Right-of-way dedication, trails, all of that stuff. Should that use change to something that is greater than 500 trips per day, as established on the approved site plan and reviewed by us in VDOT, then that's when we'd be able to trigger that.
Mike, just a clarification on the proffer. Just need a clarification on B, 2, and 3. Now, the 10-foot paved hiker bike trail, is that happening, or does it happen only after 500 trips per day?
That happens with any development on the site.
Okay, all right, I got you. One other thing I noticed on the VDOT's comments, there was a concern about a future widening of 7 in that location and whether or not the site, the proffer, provided enough space. And I see in the response it says, should can. Will it or will it not?
That B1 actually was modified to take away, I think it was a 10-foot dedication initially, to something that was more consistent with what VDOT was looking for, and that's a 60-foot of right-of-way from the center line of eastbound Route 7 prior to the first occupancy permit. So that was specifically to address that VDOT concern, is to make sure they got enough. And that would occur with the first project, first development.
Anyone else? Yes, Mr. Thomas.
Who will enforce the trips per day? VDOT and the developer, or the county and the developer?
It would be a combination. The county, we would approve a site plan. That site plan would identify the use on the property. And so before we would approve that site plan, we would then use that evaluation with VDOT and the ITE to demonstrate the trips that would be likely to come from that.
And
May not be very specific, every day may be different, but using that as the guide, that's what would give us the confirmation that they would meet that trip count or exceed that trip count.
Mike, with not being real sure what the final planned use is, if you don't see 500 trips per day for whatever that use is, that means there's no money for improvements?
That's correct. There's no.
With 3 entrances, is $10,000 seems not a lot of money for improvements. Am I getting that wrong?
I would not disagree, and especially after the discussions we've had before. It's a balance. We recognize this is already zoned commercially, but it's of a very limited trip generation. The area was commercial before, but it didn't develop. So you balance that with kind of recognition of what some of the needs are out in that area. And the one that has been identified continually is pedestrian improvements in that area, especially with the high school. So those projects aren't cheap, for sure. And they take some working through with VDOT to make sure that they can actually be implemented, such as down at Sharando High School. I don't believe 10,000 goes too far, but it is a start. And again, like the previous request, it can be used and leveraged for additional funding potentially.
Just one question. It talks about the proffers or the money for improvements. But as far as the acceleration, deceleration lanes, everything that VDOT requires, that's not considered as part of the improvements. That's separate.
That's separate. That would be needed with the initial site development.
What I was just trying to get at, they're not going to take that 10,000 and say, well, we had to do so much acceleration lane, so that's your $10,000.
That's right. That's right. Much like the previous one, wouldn't be able to use that for Dawson Drive as an example.
It's Mr. Mahone.
Mr. Reddy, just wanted to confirm that from a staff perspective, you're comfortable that at site plan that you have what you need to get the analysis that you and VDOT have indicated will ultimately be required from a turn lane perspective, et cetera?
Yes, sir. The trip counts.
Thanks.
Okay. Anyone else? Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
This is a, let's see, we haven't heard from the applicant. Heaven's sakes.
I am pinch hitting for the gentleman that usually sits to your right there, so I would be glad to answer any questions that you may have. I will say, the one challenge with this site, and Gary and I talked about it several times, is that when you take into account your zoning buffers and your building setbacks, you end up with about 3/4 of an acre that you can develop on. So that's why we chose the threshold for the traffic rather than trying to do a specific land use. It's tough to plan something for a site this small. Questions for?
Could I just have,
Yes,
it is
Mr.
really
Mahone.
a comment, and I'd had some correspondence with Mr. Oates previously about the lack of a general development plan with this, and I know it's a simple application, and it's one that, really the commitments are covered, in the proffers, there's no question about that. But I do think that as you move forward with it, as it goes to the board, it may be helpful to incorporate a GDP, just to relate some of these commitments to the layout of the site and what's around it. More of, just to orient people a little bit more clearly, to what's there and what's proposed. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much. This is a public hearing. Is there anyone in the audience who would like to speak to this rezoning? Anyone? Well, seeing no one, we will close the public hearing. We have,
Madam Chairman, I move that the Planning Commission recommend the Board of Supervisors approve of rezoning 03-015, subject to the proffers contained in the application.
Second.
any other discussion? Mr. Unger?
Unger, yes.
Marston, yes.
Ambrosi, yes.
Manuel, yes.
Crockett, yes.
Thomas, yes.
Kenny, yes.
Dunlap, yes.
Moan, yes.
And the chair votes yes. This will go to the board on May the 27th. I do believe we are finished with our agenda items. At this moment, I will share with you that we do have a meeting coming up on the 20th. And an agenda. Yes, so,
Did she say we did or didn't?
anything left for the good of the cause?
Adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed?